Hello and welcome to chapter 12 of George Yule's The Study of Language, where we are doing a study of discourse analysis. Okay? In lecture 1 and 2, we are going to discuss the basic concepts of discourse analysis as an important field in linguistics. So, we are going to go over multiple definitions of discourse analysis and we will see the general scope of this field of study. This is the outline of lecture 1 and 2. So today we're going to be actually discussing four main topics. First of all, we're going to actually dig into the meaning of the word discourse, okay, as have been postulated by different scholars like Guy Cook, like Davy Crystal, and Oxford English Language Dictionary. Okay, and this is just like to have a broader review of the term and to see what it really means, especially as far as the field of linguistics is concerned. And then we'll be moving to talk about interpreting discourse, and this is according to George Yule. Okay. We will see what we mean by interpreting discourse and how do we interpret discourse in general. Then we will look at two key actually elements in language structure or discourse structure. These are cohesion and coherence. We will look at what we mean by these two terms and how they contribute to the building of a full-fledged, I would say, discourse. All right. Now, if we are moving to defining discourse, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, discourse in linguistics is a method of analyzing the structure of texts or utterances longer than one sentence. Okay, and here I want you to focus on every word, okay, because all this definition actually is of supreme importance. It just sums up the whole thing. All right, so um, discourse is a method of analyzing the structure of text or utterances longer than one sentence. So here we're not talking about segments, we're not talking about words, we're not talking about phrases, we are talking about something that goes beyond the level of sentence. We're talking about text, okay? So we're talking about ideas, okay? So in every text, so since we are talking about utterances longer than one sentence, then we are actually working on at a higher level of language, all right? So, and when analyzing these texts, we are taking into account two levels. Okay, we take into account their linguistic content, that is the kind of language used, the linguistic techniques. It's a kind of looking at the stylistic facade of the language or the stylistic part of the language. How is the language used, or the kind of diction, and so on, because as you know, these things actually reveal a lot about the language used, and we take into account their sociolinguistic context. We are also concerned with the culture of this text, how, when, and where this text has been produced. Okay, if it is a conversation between two people, we need actually to know if these people are friends, if these people are enemies, if these people are colleagues, if these people are classmates. So unlike as we did in stylistic analysis, we are never actually concerned about the content. We are never actually concerned about the author or the speakers and so on. We are doing a pure linguistic analysis, okay, at the level of word choice, at the level of sentence structure, clauses, and so on. But here we are doing all this plus taking into account the sociolinguistic context of the language or of the text. So, analysis performed using this method. Okay, so I like actually this definition because it says it all right? So I'm going to read it again so that you ponder on every word here. So, linguistics, a method of analyzing the structure of text or utterances longer than one sentence, taking into account both their linguistic content and their sociolinguistic context. Analysis performed using this method. Now let's shed light on different selected multiple definitions that have been postulated and presented by different scholars as far as discourse is concerned. So, according to Crystal, discourse is a continuous stretch of language larger than a sentence, often constituting a coherent unit such as sermon, argument, joke, or narrative. Okay, again, we have here this emphasis on the idea of that discourse cannot be just a simple sentence. It cannot just be a phrase. A discourse should always be a complete text. Uh, so it should be more than just a sentence. It could be here a sermon, like in Friday's prayers, khutbah al-Jumu'ah, or it could be an argument, it could be a joke, or a narrative, and it should always constitute a coherent unit. It means it should be meaningful. It should hold an idea. There should always be an idea behind it to discuss. Okay, so when we talk about, for example, a joke, some jokes have or laden with ideas. Some of them are laden with political ideologies, or some of them can be, you know, can have very deep purposes. Okay, so I sometimes may not tell you something that I don't like about you, but I could tell you this by a means of a joke. Okay, so you see how language is deep. And so in this we are talking about something that goes beyond a sentence. We are talking about ideas, um, a coherent unit. Okay, now let's move on to the second uh, definition that was advanced by Guy Cook, 1989. Guy Cook defines discourse as a stretches of language perceived to be meaningful, unified, and purposive. It should have a purpose. Okay, so it shouldn't be something just like that. It could be a political speech, for example, خطاب سياسي. It could be تصريح سياسي, a political argument. It could be a poem. Okay, in a poem we always have something hidden there. We have a message. We have something to preach. Okay, so what are actually the common features among all these definitions? Like starting with the Oxford English Dictionary and with the Crystal uh, definition and Cook's as well, is that they all agree that discourse is a stretch of language longer than a sentence. A sentence can never be a discourse. We cannot actually just by means of a sentence discuss its, you know, the hidden ideas or the messages behind it. Okay, unless we will see in conversations, it's quite different. All right. A discourse should always be meaningful and coherent. Okay, so of course it should be meaningful. It should have a kind of an idea in there. It communicates and has a purpose. It may be spoken or written. Okay, a Friday sermon is of course spoken. It could be written as we have in narratives, for example, or in, for example, newspaper articles في المقالات الصحفية. It's something written. All right, so it could be spoken as in jokes, sermons, and so on, or it could be written as, for example, in a newspaper article. Now, for George Yule, discourse analysis is defined as the analysis of language beyond the sentence. So, as we know in linguistics, for example, we have this idea of working on those smaller bits of language. We're talking about, sounds, phonemes. We're talking about the sentence structure. We're talking about, phrases. But here we are going beyond this level of language. Yes, we are dealing with the elements of linguistics. We are dealing with yes, a complete analysis of language, but at the same time, we are taking into context um, or into account the context, the socio-cultural context of the language. So, discourse analysis defined as the analysis of language beyond the sentence. And this contrasts with the types of analysis more typical of modern linguistics, which are chiefly concerned with the study of grammar, like the study of smaller bits of language such as sounds, including phonetics and phonology, or parts of words such as in morphology. Okay, we have those bound form morphemes, free morphemes. Okay, we are doing this kind of analysis in linguistics, but it's quite different the situation here with discourse analysis. We could be dealing with meaning, semantics, okay, the absolute meanings of words, and the order of words in sentences, such as in syntax. Okay, yes, we're dealing with all these things in discourse analysis, but the plus the sociocultural context of the language produced. So discourse analysts study larger chunks of language as they flow together. Okay, it could be in written form, or it could be in spoken form, like we have in interviews. All right, so it really depends on so many different factors, plus the language part. Okay, now if you are to raise this question, what is the difference between text and discourse? Now, some linguists, this is actually a very, I would say, problematic, I would say, question in this field, especially in linguistics. What is discourse? What is text? Now, generally, they can be used as, interchangeably. They have like the same meaning. And some of them, they say no, they are not identical, they are kind of different. There is some slight difference between them. Some linguists define discourse as the study of text in context. Okay? So, you cannot call this a discourse until you are doing an analysis of the text, a contextual analysis of the text. Now, if you have a text, for example, in front of you, a sermon. Now, this is a sermon, is a text, okay? But once you are studying the sociocultural dimensions of this sermon, of this text, then you are doing a discourse analysis. In this view, discourse is language in action or interaction, and the text is the grammatical and meaningful record of that interaction. Okay? So, again, so a text and discourse, they are almost the same, but once you take a text and you analyze it in terms of the context, in terms of the cultural dimensions and the sociocultural dimensions, then you are actually doing discourse analysis to the text. So the text is no longer a text, you are making it a discourse. Now, maybe you have this question in mind. What is context basically? Now, the context of a text is the information needed to interpret the text and make sense of it. Okay? Now, when you have a text, for example, خطبة جمعة, باهم. All right? So, how can you interpret the language of the text or the ideas of the text by or from a discourse analysis standpoint? You have to have some information, some data about the text. For example, this sermon was, for example, written in Al-Abbasi time. It was said during, it was produced during a kind of political turbulence at the time. Okay, so you have to, and this person who, for example, said it was, or who read it out to the prayers, he was, for example, a Sunni or Shia or whatever. So all this information actually add to the value of the text and makes the discourse analysis plausible and feasible. So this includes information about the interlocutors, okay, the speaker and the listener. For example, if you are doing a discourse analysis to an interview, okay, like the interview between Adele and Oprah. If you want to like do a discourse analysis interview, you have to collect some information, some data about the listener and the interlocutor, about these two speakers and how, for example, both of them touched upon some ideas that are shared between them. Okay, so this is how it works. And also, you have to think about the setting, like the time and the place of the speech event and the purpose of the interaction. What was the purpose from this interaction? Because there is no discourse, there is no interaction that is just done in vain. Every interaction, every speech event, there is a message, there is a purpose behind it. Now, this is a very simple example, okay, between a speech event between A and B, okay, because in discourse analysis, it consists of different areas. The discourse analysis can be done on, for example, a conversation. Okay, you can actually work on a conversation. You could be working on a text, a spoken or a written text, as for example, a political speech. It could be done on a literary production, like for example, a narrative. All right. So if you take this, for example, um, this conversation between A and B, see how things actually work here. So the example, the telephone, for example, is ringing. A, that's the telephone. So A says, that's the telephone. B answers, I'm in the bath. A says, okay. Okay, again, I'm gonna read it. So the telephone is ringing. A says, that's the telephone. B answers, I'm in the bath. A replies to B, okay. So if we are to conduct a discourse analysis here, remember, we are not doing just a simple sentence, that's the telephone on the stop. We have here a chunk, we have here a segment of conversation that we can talk about it a lot, okay? These are just three simple sentences, but it says a lot about how these people interact and understand each other. So, how do both the speakers manage to make sense of what the other says? So, the first speaker here, that's A, makes a request for the second person or for the second speaker to perform an action. That's the telephone. It means go and answer the phone. Maybe I'm in the kitchen, busy doing something. I'm writing something. I'm working on something. I'm listening. I'm watching TV. So I'm calling the other person. That's the telephone. It's ringing. Go and answer it. Okay. So I am requesting the second person to do an action. Now the second person answers or state a reason why he cannot comply with the request. He didn't say, I cannot, I am now. No, simply said, I'm in the bath. I'm in the bath. It means I cannot perform the action. You go and do it. I'm in the bath. All right. The first speaker undertakes to perform the action. Okay. Now, these are three simple sentences. All right. That when you have this is what we call in discourse analysis conversation analysis. We are doing now a conversation analysis. The first speaker makes a request for the second speaker to perform an action. The second speaker states reason why he cannot comply with the request. and the first speaker undertakes to perform the action. Now, the language users must have a lot of knowledge, non linguistics. Now, nobody here said to the other, go and answer the phone. Nobody here said to the other, I'm busy, I cannot. Just, stretches of sentences that says a lot. So we all have something, a shared knowledge. This is what we call cultural context. Okay, السياق الثقافي. We understand each other. Okay, of how conversation works. That's not simply linguistic knowledge. All right, there is nothing here that is purely linguistic. Says to the other, do this or do that. But just by simple sentences, I understand by means of our cultural schemata that this person needs me to do this or doesn't want me to do that. Examples of discourse, as we stated earlier, it could be spoken or written. Discourse, it can be like, for some examples of spoken discourse, could be conversations, lectures, sermons, interviews, jokes, speeches. Okay? And for written discourse, it could be reports, political text, legal text, literature, newspaper articles, newspaper headlines. Now let's move on to the second part of this lecture, which is interpreting discourse according to George Orwell. When we concentrate on the description of a particular language, we are normally concerned with the accurate representation of the forms and structures used in that language. I want you now here to remember, in stylistics we focused on structures only, and we completely overlooked and averted our eyes from what go beyond the text in terms of the meaning, objective of the text, the authors, the ideas, and okay. Here we are doing a bilateral task. You're going to cover both the linguistic part of the text and the sociocultural part of the text. Okay. So you do both of them simultaneously. All right. So, however, as language users, we are capable of more than simply recognizing correct versus incorrect forms and structures. We can go beyond sentence structure. Now, for George Orwell, we can understand each other even if the language, even if there are some errors in the language, some mistakes in the language, we still can make use of the language. We can understand each other. Okay? And this is another competence that we are inborn with. This is something that we can do in order to decode the language. And he gives some examples from some fragments in the newspapers. He said that we can actually understand many fragments in newspapers. Still, we don't have the full linguistic forms of the sentence. For example, we can cope with fragments in newspaper headlines such as trains collide, two die, okay, or two dies. Okay, so trains collide, two dies. Now, for somebody, you might actually think, what's that? Trains collide. What's the relationship? But we can make use and we understand that what happened in the first part, that is the trains collide when they clash, these two trains, was the cause of what happened in the second part. Two passengers, perhaps, that were on the train, they died. So, journalese language is known for its brevity, and still we understand. We easily process the information cognitively. It is a talent that we are endowed with. So, sometimes it is developed by experience, or sometimes we understand it just like that, okay? So, just like as we have in jokes, some people, they can understand jokes very well, or the superficial meaning of the jokes, and others can understand the hidden meanings of those jokes. Another example, We can also make sense of notices like no shoes, no service. Okay, as in some European countries, people would always, especially during summertime, people would move around, um, and they are bare feet. They move around bare feet, and so some shops they don't like it, or restaurants or coffee shops. So we understand that a conditional relation exists between the two parts. If you're not wearing shoes, you will receive no service. So, as you notice in the former examples, two trains collide, or trains collide, two die, or no shoes, no service, that we actually can cope with sentences that are, that in fact lack, I would say, basic constituents of um, any ordinary English sentence, but we can understand them, and we can understand the philosophy behind them, or the idea, or the message actually behind them. Okay, so we can also cope with text written in English, which appear to break a lot of rules of the language. Okay, so this also happens that sometimes you read something that is, full of grammatical mistakes, or you know syntactic, or that lacks, I would say, um, accuracy at the level of lexism, or something like that, but we still actually can draw the meaning of the text. So the following example provided by Eric Nelson, it is from an essay by a student learning English, and this text contains all kinds of errors, yet it can be fully understood. So let's read the text together. So this is the text, okay? The text titled by my town. My natal was in a small town. Okay, look at this. Look at this opening. My natal was in a small town, very close to Riyadh, capital of Saudi Arabia. So we understand that this person is writing about his, about his town. Okay, so my natal. So as you can see, so maybe he wants to say that my native town, or that my town, okay, was, as you can see, this is, there is a grammatical error here. All right. So, in a small town very close to Riyadh, capital of Saudi Arabia. The distance between town and Riyadh, 7 miles exactly. Okay, so the distance instead of distance. So as you can see, so there are so many errors at all levels. The name of this Al-Masani, that is Al-Masana, that means in English factories. Okay, it breaks, or it takes this name from the people's career. This could be a spelling mistake. In my childhood, I remember the people lived was very simple. Most the people was farmer. Okay, so of course, like any person with basic knowledge in English would absolutely point out the errors in this paragraph. So, but we can fully understand the information actually entailed in this text. It's easy to understand it. So you might actually, ask yourself, what do we learn from the My Town text as far as discourse analysis is concerned? The example actually serves to illustrate a simple point about the way we react to language that contains in grammatical forms. Okay, now this text actually reveals something about our ability to understand the text. So the text, any text, doesn't have to be 100% correct, doesn't have to be mistakesless in order to, um, in order to make its point. Sometimes it may contain all kinds of errors, but we still, as language speakers, may draw the meaning or the track or the cracks of the text. We don't simply reject a text as ungrammatical, we try to make sense of it. We are cognitively predisposed to decode language, okay? That is something that is endowed in our subconscious. We always attempt to arrive at a reasonable interpretation of what the writer intends to convey or what the speaker, okay, intends to say. Do you know why we were able to understand the My Town text? Because the text is cohesive, because this text is coherent. What does that mean when we say that the text is cohesive? Okay, so for Joshua, a text or a discourse can be meaningful if it, uh, you know, um, uh, you know, has two basic, I would say, characteristics. This is, it has to have a kind of cohesion and it has to be coherent. Okay, so what do we mean by cohesion? We know that text must have a certain structure that expand on factors quite different from those required in the structure of a single sentence. Okay, so um, when you write a simple sentence you have a certain kind of structure. يعني عندك تركيبة معينة, you have to follow, you have to respect it. And so when you write a text you also have a certain structure that you have to follow or that you have to comply with. Okay, so حتى لما تكتب نص there is a kind of structure between sentences. هذا الترابط ما بين كل هذه الجمل, once you achieve it then the text becomes cohesive. Okay, so um, some of those factors are described in terms of cohesion. Cohesion describes or refers to the linguistic ties and connections that exist within a text. Okay, يعني هو الترابط البنيوي في النص, زي ما يكون في ترابط بنيوي في الجملة. Okay, we have to have, for example, a subject, a verb, a predicate or a complement. حتى النص, it has to respect a certain structure. Okay, and the most important element in a text is the cohesion. Okay, it has to be cohesive. والcohesion هذا can be achieved by different actually methods. We will look at them. A number of those cohesive ties can be identified in the following paragraph. Now, let's together read out this paragraph and see how cohesion is, achieved in this paragraph. My father once bought a Lincoln convertible. He did it by saving every penny he could. That car would be worth a fortune nowadays. However, he sold it to help pay for my college education. Sometimes I think I'd rather have the convertible. Now, after we read the text, let's describe it together in terms of its cohesive devices. As shown in the paragraph, there are connections that are present here in the use of words to maintain reference to the same people and things throughout. Okay, so as you can see that how to create a kind of cohesion in the text is that there should always be reference, something that relates or that links the ideas together, okay, in order to make them meaningful. So for example, the father here, once the father is mentioned, then we have the pronoun he, okay, repeated many times, and these are all all these pronouns referring to the father, of course. Okay, so and we have my, I, Lincoln, it. So pronouns such these actually help to create a kind of cohesive uh, text that can be meaningful as it relates things to each other. This is just a simple example. We still have many other examples. There are more general connections here created by a number of terms that share a common element of meaning, such as money. Okay, and this is creates a semantic. I mean, all these words that I will be mentioning here, they are actually related to the same semantic unit. For example, words that relate to money, such as bought, saving, penny, sold, and pay. All right. So these are all words that come under the umbrella of money, and so they all create a kind of cohesion inside the text. We also have another, um, you know, connections that that are connected together as for time, like once, nowadays, sometimes. So there is also the connector, however, that marks the relationship of what follows to what went before. When you use those conjunctions and connections such as however, when, and since, and that, you are using these to make sense. Okay, so this is one way that can create any, or that can make any text a meaningful discourse. Okay, the verb tenses in the first four sentences are all in the past, creating a connection between those events, and their different time is indicated by the present tense of the final sentence. You see here, this is something that is related to, as we did in stylistic analysis. We are here talking about something that has to do at the linguistic level. Okay, this is purely linguistic. Okay, as when we talk about cohesion, you are describing the text in terms of its connections, uh, linguistic connections, the use of conjunctions, the use of relatives, how things are pronounced, how things are related to each other. If we have any key terms here, like for example money, we have some words that come with the word money, like buy, sold, expensive, cheap, and so on. So these are all actually purely linguistic, and such existence of these um, manifestations of language create a kind of cohesion inside the text. So the analysis of those cohesive ties within a text gives us more or some insight into how writers structure what they want to say. Okay, so we are doing it from the very scratch. So this is how writers, or this is how we in general as human beings make sense, is by using cohesive language. Your language has to be cohesive in order to be understood. And so the primary aspect of a meaningful discourse is that it has to be cohesive in the first place. And there are maybe crucial factors in our judgments on whether something is well written or not. However, now we will see that okay, the text can be cohesive, but it could be incoherent. What does that mean? So we will see now the other factor that is very much important, coherence. Let's learn more about it. So by itself, cohesion wouldn't be sufficient to enable us to make sense of what we read. So we will see that sometimes the text can be cohesive, but in the same time it is incoherent. So it is quite easy to create a highly cohesive text that has a lot of connections between the sentences, but is very difficult to interpret. Okay, and we will see some examples about this, how a text sometimes can be cohesive, but it could be incoherent. That means it could be meaningless. Let's read the following text and note that it has connections such as Lincoln, the car, red, the color, her and she, so on, but it doesn't make sense. So I'll read out the text and try to make sense of it, if you could, of course. My father bought a Lincoln convertible. Okay, that's a good beginning. The car driven by the police was red. That color doesn't suit her. She consists of three letters. However, a letter isn't as fast as a telephone call. So, what do you think about this? Okay, here we have all kinds of cohesive ties. Okay, we have my father bought a Lincoln convertible. Okay, the car. Now, the car, of course, refers to the Lincoln driven by the police was red. That color, again, red. That color, this refers to the color, doesn't suit her. She consists of three letters. Okay, we have the pronoun she that refers to her. We don't know who's that person. However, we have this, you know, um, this one. However, a letter isn't as fast. This is completely not connected. Okay, this text is not connected, though it could appear like from the first sight cohesive, but it's not connected. Yes, it is cohesive maybe, but it's incoherent. It doesn't make sense. So it becomes clear from now that the connectedness we experience in our interpretation of normal text isn't simply based on connections between the words or the linguistic entities in the text. There must be some other factors that lead us to distinguish connected text that make sense from those do not. So this factor is described as coherence. Let's learn more about it. Coherence, the concept of coherence, everything fitting together well. Okay? So, it's not something that exists in words per se or structures, but something that exists in people. It is people who make sense of what they read and hear. Okay? So there are things that it's not only about the linguistic entities that are present in a text, but there are things that needs a general understanding or something, a background, a shared background. They try to arrive to an interpretation that is in line with their experience of the way the world is. Our ability to make sense of what we read is probably only a small part of that general ability we have to make sense of what we perceive or experience in the world. You have to create meaningful connections that are not actually expressed by the words or sentences. So, the key to the concept of coherence isn't something that exists in words or structures like, you know, trains collide to die. Okay, here maybe we don't have any cohesive connections, but it is coherent. We understand it because we have this idea that trains are, vehicles that transport people, and people are passengers on a train, and when trains collide, people die. But something that exists in people, it's people who make sense of what they read and hear. So, coherence is the relationships which link the meanings of utterances in a discourse or of the sentences in a text. Look at this example. Matt says, "Have you ever seen Titanic?" Kat says, "I hate Leonardo DiCaprio." Matt, "Oh, okay then." So, what do you understand? Did Kat see the movie Titanic? No, of course. Why? Because She said, she didn't actually say, I didn't see the movie. She simply said, I hate Leonardo DiCaprio. And of course, Leonardo DiCaprio is the movie star of Titanic. And so she didn't watch it. She didn't see it. Okay? So, Matt, have you ever seen Titanic? Cat, I hate Leonardo DiCaprio. Matt, oh, okay then. There are no cohesive ties within this fragment of discourse. So, how does each of these people manage to make sense of what the other says? They do use the information contained in the sentences expressed, but there must be something else involved in the interpretation. Matt asks Kat if she has ever seen Titanic, and she answers that she hates Leonardo DiCaprio. Since Leonardo DiCaprio is the main actor of the movie, Matt understands that she hasn't seen it. Okay? So there are no cohesive ties within this fragment of discourse or this conversation, but we can see coherence there. Okay, we can see that there is a kind of meaning entailed in this uh, conversation. This is your weekly assignment, week 1 and 2. The question says, what is the basic difference between cohesion and coherence? I'll be so thankful if you could do a bit of research on Google and to find more definitions or examples on these two elements of discourse. Okay, so short paragraph of 8 lines max should be, of course, error free, no copy and paste, or you know what, it's fine to copy and paste, but you have to mention the reference, for example, of the definitions or of the examples. Thank you so much for watching. See you